The lights went out across Asterian city without warning. Not a flicker, not a warning alert. Just silence, sudden and complete. 40 floors above the streets, the sterling penthouse lost its glow. The glass walls that once framed the city's dominance faded into darkness, leaving only distant sirens and the low murmur of confused traffic below. For the first time in years, Cole Sterling's home was no longer smarter than the city it overlooked. Backup systems failed. Elevators froze. Screens went black. Cole stood still in the center of the living space, suit jacket draped over his arm, phone useless in his hand. His life had always been powered by systems, predictable, responsive, efficient. He built them, trusted them, controlled them. Tonight, none of them answered him. From behind him, heels struck the marble floor with sharp impatience. "This is unacceptable." Veronica's voice cut through the dark, tense and sharp. Her phone was raised like it could intimidate the signal into returning. She paced, breath tight, anger focused not on the outage, but on the inconvenience. "My board dinner was tonight. Donors flew in for this," she snapped. "This building is supposed to be secure, advanced, exclusive." Cole said nothing. He was still listening for systems that refused to speak. Veronica stopped pacing and turned on him, frustration flashing across her face. "Say something." Before he could answer, her decision was already made. "I'm leaving," she said. "There are hotels with generators. I am not sitting in the dark like this." She moved fast, pulling a carry-on from the closet, tossing items inside without care. Her movements were decisive, irritated, rehearsed. This wasn't fear, it was embarrassment. Cole watched her zip the bag. No argument followed, no hesitation, no glance back. When the door closed behind her, the sound echoed longer than it should have. The penthouse felt enormous after that. Too quiet, too empty. Cole lowered himself onto the edge of the sofa, elbows resting on his knees. Without the city's hum, without screens, without noise, there was nowhere for his thoughts to hide. For the first time in a long time, the man who built systems had nothing to manage. Footsteps moved softly behind him. He turned. Nia Brooks stood near the kitchen doorway, holding a small lantern she'd lit from an emergency kit. The glow was gentle, steady. She hadn't rushed. She hadn't panicked. "I can stay," she said calmly. "At least until things settle." Cole nodded once. In a city gone dark, abandoned by the woman he married, the only person who remained was the one paid to clean his home. And, somehow, that stayed with him. The lantern's soft glow pushed back the darkness just enough to make the space feel smaller, less like a penthouse, more like a room with 2 people in it. Nia moved quietly, placing the lantern on the counter before reaching into a cabinet Cole hadn't touched in years. She found candles, arranged them with intention, then lit them one by one. The light didn't try to dominate the space, it softened it. Cole watched from the sofa. He hadn't asked her to do any of this. That was what unsettled him. She filled a kettle using bottled water, set it on a portable stove she'd retrieved from the staff closet, and waited. No rush, no commentary, just presence. For a man whose world revolved around urgency, the calm felt unfamiliar. When she handed him a cup, their fingers brushed briefly. He noticed how steady her hands were. "Chamomile," she said. "It helps when the body's still moving faster than the mind." Cole gave a faint nod and took a sip. The warmth spread slowly, grounding him in a way no boardroom ever had. Minutes passed, then more. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest, the kind that didn't demand performance. Nia leaned against the counter, her posture relaxed but attentive. She studied his face, not with curiosity, but concern. "Are you okay?" The words were simple. They shouldn't have mattered. But they did. Cole didn't answer right away. No one had asked him that in years, not without wanting something attached to it. Not without expectation, not without an audience. The question reached a place he'd buried beneath success, beneath obligation, beneath image. He exhaled slowly. "I don't know," he admitted. The honesty surprised even him. He stared at the floor as the truth found its way out. "Everything in my life works," he said quietly, "except the parts that are supposed to feel like something." Nia didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to reassure him. She didn't correct his words. She listened. "I thought if I built enough, if I did everything right, then the rest would fall into place," he continued. "But standing here tonight, I realized. I don't know when I last felt seen." Nia's voice was gentle when she spoke. Being admired isn't the same as being known. That landed harder than he expected. She shifted slightly, choosing her words with care. "Some people love what you represent. Others, they love who you are when there's nothing to show." Cole looked up at her then. Really looked. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't pretending this moment was anything more than what it was. And yet, in the stillness of a powerless city, she had given him something no amount of wealth ever had: understanding. The man who had everything finally understood what he'd been missing, and it terrified him. He married a woman the world admired, a woman whose name opened doors, a woman who knew exactly where to stand when cameras appeared, a woman whose presence looked perfect beside his success. But the woman who truly loved him had been wiping fingerprints off glass tables and making sure he ate when no one else noticed. That contrast, quiet versus celebrated, sat at the center of Cole Sterling's life long before the blackout exposed it. Have you ever chosen what made sense on paper, only to wake up one day and realize it felt empty? Have you ever committed to something because it looked right to everyone else, while ignoring the small voice that asked whether it felt right to you? Cole had. He'd told himself love could be structured. That commitment was about alignment, not emotion. That choosing the right partner meant choosing stability, image, and shared ambition. But nights like this one, without noise, without distraction, had a way of forcing honesty, and honesty rarely arrived politely. Cole Sterling's marriage wasn't loud with conflict. It was quiet with absence. Veronica was rarely home. When she was, conversations stayed shallow: calendars, appearances, obligations. They shared a space, but not a rhythm. Affection became formal. Touch became optional. Silence became normal. Meanwhile, Nia's presence filled gaps she never tried to claim. She noticed when Cole skipped meals. She adjusted the home to his habits without asking. She remembered details no one else considered important because they weren't impressive enough to announce. She gave care without performance. And that was the danger. Because emotional emptiness doesn't arrive suddenly. It builds slowly, in routines that look functional but feel hollow. Cole hadn't gone looking for connection. He hadn't crossed lines. He hadn't made promises he couldn't keep. But he had ignored something just as powerful: the quiet truth that real devotion often shows up without asking to be seen. And once you notice it, it becomes impossible to unsee. So what happens when the person who truly sees you isn't the one you promised forever to? What happens when the warmth you've been missing doesn't come from luxury, shared status, or polished appearances, but from someone whose presence feels steady when everything else fails? Cole Sterling had built an empire by making the right decisions. But standing in a darkened penthouse, abandoned by the woman he married, he faced a question no algorithm could solve. Was loyalty about contracts and appearances, or about who stays when there's nothing left to gain? Because once you recognize real care, the kind that shows up without cameras, applause, or expectation, you can't pretend it doesn't exist. And pretending was no longer an option. Before this story continues, take a second to support it. If you believe real love isn't always loud, if you've ever felt unseen in a relationship, please tap the like button and leave a comment. It tells YouTube this story matters and it helps more people find it. Now let's talk about how Cole Sterling became the man who chose wrong. Long before he realized what real love looked like. Before the blackout. Before the silence. Before Nia's quiet question changed everything, there was a man who believed control was the same as connection. A man who thought success could replace closeness. A man who optimized everything, including love. That man was Cole Sterling. And this is how he built everything. Except the life he actually needed. Before the blackout. Before the silence swallowed the penthouse whole. Before one quiet question cracked a billionaire's armor. There was a boy in a Styrian city who learned early that attention came with conditions. Cole Sterling didn't grow up in the kind of home where people praised you for being gifted. In his neighborhood, being smart was useful only if it helped you survive. His mother worked double shifts at a community clinic on the edge of the city. She didn't have the energy for speeches. She had rules, routines, and a tired kind of love that still made sure he ate. She'd come home with her shoes in hand, trying not to wake him, and find him sitting at the kitchen table with a borrowed laptop that looked like it had lived too many lives already. The screen would be filled with lines of code and a cheap online tutorial playing in a corner. One night, she stopped in the doorway and watched him for a long time. "Cole," she said gently. He startled like he'd been caught doing something wrong. "I wasn't doing anything bad." She walked over, kissed the top of his head, and looked at the screen like it was written in another language. "I know you're not, but it's past midnight." "I'm close," he said, eyes bright. "If I can make it work, it'll fix the problem." "What problem?" He hesitated, then pointed at a little prototype he'd built, an app that tracked the bus schedules. In their area, because the buses came late so often that people got fired for it. "So folks don't lose their jobs," he said quietly. "It shouldn't be this hard to get to work." His mother stared at the screen, then at him, and her face softened into something equal parts pride and worry. "That's a good heart," she whispered. "But don't forget, you're still a child." Cole didn't answer. He just kept working. By 15, he was fixing computers for neighbors. Not for glory, just because he could. A Styrian city had two sides, the one with glass towers that reflected the sky, and the one where people learned to make do. Cole lived close enough to see the towers, far enough to know they weren't built for him. He didn't hate the city. He studied it like a puzzle. Why did the wealthy side get constant upgrades, smoother roads, faster, internet, better security, while his side got maybe next year? He began to treat the world like a system. If it wasn't fair, it wasn't personal. It was code. It was structure. It was design. And design could be improved. By 17, a guidance counselor pushed him into applying for a scholarship program sponsored by a local tech incubator. Downtown, the kind of place where teenagers wore blazers and said words like disruption with serious faces. Cole didn't have a blazer. He wore a clean shirt and his only decent shoes. The interview panel was polite but distant. "What do you want to build, Cole?" a woman asked, pen poised. Cole's eyes flicked to the skyline visible through the window. "Systems people can trust," he said. "Infrastructure that doesn't fail the people who need it most." A man across from him smiled as if indulging him. "That's noble. But what's the product?" Cole didn't flinch. "The product is reliability," he said. "That's the real luxury." The woman's pen stopped. He got in. The incubator introduced him to mentors who spoke in metrics and performance charts. Cole listened like a sponge. He wasn't dazzled by the polished offices. He wasn't charmed by the elevator music. He learned the city's other language: money, investors, timelines, public, image, and he learned how to speak it without losing his edge. He went to a top university on scholarship, commuting part-time at first, then eventually relocating when his workload became too heavy. College didn't transform him socially, it sharpened him intellectually. While other students chased networking parties, Cole chased lab access and late-night builds. He wasn't trying to fit in, he was trying to win. By 21, he'd built a security prototype that impressed an entire panel of industry advisors. It wasn't flashy, it was practical, smart infrastructure designed to recognize vulnerabilities before they became disasters. A professor pulled him aside after the presentation. "You've got something here, but you need to sell it." Cole frowned. "It works." "That's not what I said," the professor replied. "I said you need to sell it." That sentence became a new rule in Cole's mind. Working isn't enough. You have to package the work. Within a year, He launched Cyrexon Systems, a startup at first, small and underfunded, built out of a shared workspace and stubborn discipline. Cyrexon sounded sleek, trustworthy, global. Cole chose the name the way he chose everything, for impact. The early days were brutal. He slept in short shifts, lived on cheap coffee and protein bars, and held meetings that ended with polite rejections. One investor leaned back in a leather chair and said, "You're young, brilliant, but you're not connected." Cole's smile was controlled. "My systems are." The investor laughed. "That's not the same." Cole walked out and wrote a note on his phone. "Connections are systems too. Build them." He built them, not by chasing popularity, by outperforming. When Cyrexon finally landed its first major contract, smart infrastructure upgrades, in the city's downtown corridor, Cole didn't celebrate with champagne. He slept. Then he woke up and wrote the next plan. Asterian City began to whisper his name in rooms that previously wouldn't have spoken it. Cole Sterling, the prodigy, the disciplined one, the CEO who didn't miss. By 30, Cyrexon was no longer a startup. It was a machine, a force. By 39, Cole was considered untouchable. But even in the rise, he kept a part of himself sealed away, like a file he didn't want anyone opening. He never forgot where he came from. He just learned how to outgrow it without letting it soften him. Cole's success wasn't built only on intelligence. Plenty of smart people never become billionaires. Cole became Cole Sterling because he treated life like an engineering problem. He believed emotions were like weather, unreliable, sometimes disruptive, rarely useful in planning. He didn't deny feelings existed. He just didn't trust them to guide decisions. That mindset started early. When he was a teenager, he watched his mother cry once. Quietly, in the kitchen, after a phone call she tried to pretend didn't matter. He'd been coming in for water and froze when he saw her wiping her face with the back of her hand. "Mom?" he whispered. She straightened immediately, forcing a smile. "It's nothing, baby." But Cole saw what she was trying to hide. "Hurt. What happened?" he asked. She hesitated. "Someone promised something and didn't follow through." Cole stared at her for a moment, then said the sentence that would shape him for the rest of his life. "Then promises are useless." His mother's eyes widened, half sad, half impressed. "That's not what I said," she murmured. "It's what I heard," he replied. From then on, Cole learned to respect what was measurable: behavior, consistency, outcomes. Love, to him, was only trustworthy if it showed up the same way every day. And if it didn't, he didn't want it controlling his choices. By the time he became a CEO, that belief was no longer a coping mechanism. It was a brand. At Cyrexon, Cole's meetings ran with surgical precision. People came prepared, or they didn't come at all. He wasn't cruel. He simply didn't tolerate waste. A senior engineer once tried to explain why a team missed a deadline. "We had some personal issues come up." Cole held up a hand. "Personal issues are real," he said evenly, "but they do not rewrite time." The engineer swallowed. "So, what do we do?" Cole's voice stayed calm. "We build systems that don't collapse when humans have human moments." That was his obsession. Systems. When he walked into a server room, he felt something close to peace. The machines didn't pretend. They didn't demand. They didn't take. They performed exactly as they were designed. People, however, were unpredictable. People wanted recognition, affection, reassurance. Cole learned how to give the public version of those things. He could shake hands, smile at gala dinners, speak warmly about community advancement while keeping his real thoughts locked behind his eyes. The media called him visionary, disciplined, a man who doesn't get distracted. They weren't wrong. Inside, he'd made a vow to himself, never let emotion become the reason he failed. In boardrooms, it was an advantage. Investors admired his composure. Rival CEOs couldn't read him. Staff knew he wouldn't bend under pressure. But it had a cost. He stopped calling friends back if the conversations felt messy. He avoided family gatherings if they included questions he couldn't answer in bullet points. He learned to leave relationships the moment they required too much softness. He told himself it was maturity, it was control. Sometimes, late at night, he'd pour a drink, stare out at Asterian city's lights, and listen to old jazz records. He never mentioned in interviews music that had no utility, no measurable outcome, no performance metric. Just feeling. He'd sit with it, quietly, like he was studying something unfamiliar. Then he'd turn it off and return to work. That's the thing about a man who optimizes everything. Even loneliness becomes a routine. If you asked the city who Cole Sterling was, they'd describe a legend. They'd mention the glass towers bearing Cyrexon's logo. They'd talk about his keynote speeches, the security platforms that made Asterian City feel safer, the investors who traveled just to get 5 minutes of his attention. They'd say, he's got it all. Cole knew better. Because public success doesn't warm a bed. It doesn't laugh with you at the end of a long day. It doesn't notice when your shoulders carry more than they should. Cole's days were full of noise, calls, meetings, press, strategy sessions. He moved through it like a man trained for it. But when he returned home, the noise fell away, and the quiet inside his penthouse felt heavy. That penthouse wasn't built like a home. It was built like a statement. Marble floors, clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, a skyline view that looked like conquest. The staff kept it immaculate. The air smelled expensive. And yet, Cole often felt like he was walking through a showroom designed for someone else. Veronica's absence added to it. Some nights, he'd step inside, loosen his tie, and hear nothing but his own footsteps. The staff would be gone, except for late shifts. There'd be a covered plate of food in the kitchen sometimes, warm, simple, thoughtfully prepared. He didn't always eat it. Not because he didn't want it, because hunger wasn't the only thing missing. At work, people waited for him to speak, as if his words were currency. At home, he barely spoke at all. He started working later, not always because he had to. Sometimes, because the office felt less empty than the penthouse. At Cyrexon, he was needed. At home, he was present. There was a difference. One morning, his assistant handed him a schedule and said, "You have the charity auction tonight. Your wife confirmed she'll be there." Cole didn't look up. "Of course." The assistant hesitated. "You sound tired." Cole paused. His eyes lifted slowly. "I'm fine." The assistant swallowed and stepped back, as if reminded of the distance required. Cole wasn't unaware. He knew he looked controlled, untouched. He knew people admired that about him, but control, after a while, becomes a cage that looks like power. At night, he sometimes stood in his closet, passing over designer shoes, expensive suits, watches that cost more than his mother's first car. Then his eyes would catch a pair of old worn sneakers tucked in the back. He never threw them away. He didn't know why. Maybe because they belonged to the version of him who still believed life could feel simple. Cole would take them out, hold them, then put them back like a secret. In public, the pressure never stopped. One week, Cyrexon faced a security concern. Not a disaster, but enough that investors demanded reassurance. Reporters gathered outside the building. Headlines tried to make the story bigger than it was. Cole walked into a conference room full of executives and said, "We don't panic, we solve." A man at the table asked, "What if they spin this into a scandal?" Cole's eyes sharpened. "Then we give them nothing to spin." He delivered a perfect statement to the press that afternoon, calm, precise, confident. Markets stabilized. Investors praised his leadership. That night, he went home and sat alone in his study with a jazz record spinning quietly. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. The truth was, Cole could hold up an empire with one hand, but he didn't know how to hold a life. And there was another layer to the isolation, one he rarely admitted, even to himself. Sometimes, people didn't want Cole. They wanted what Cole represented. In Asterian City's elite circles, proximity to power was a currency. Being seen with him opened doors. Being married to him meant invitations, influence, status. Cole had known that. He'd chosen it anyway. Because it was predictable, because it was safe, and because he believed a safe choice was always the right one. That belief would lead him into the marriage that looked perfect and felt empty. Cole didn't wake up one day and decide he wanted to marry. Marriage wasn't an emotional dream for him. It was a life structure, a framework for stability, public trust, and legacy. It began as a suggestion. A board member, older and friendly in that polished way, invited Cole to a private dinner after a major Cyrexan expansion. They ate at a restaurant overlooking the waterfront, quiet, exclusive, designed for conversations that shaped futures. The man smiled over his glass. You've built an empire. But people want more than results. They want a story. Cole's eyes narrowed slightly. Cyrexan is the story. The man chuckled. Not the one they buy into. Investors, media, the public, they want you to feel human. Cole's voice stayed even. I am human. Then show it, the man said, leaning forward. A family man image. Stability, a wife. It calms people. It creates trust. Cole didn't like the bluntness, but he understood the logic. Trust was a product, and perception influenced markets. So when he met Veronica Hale at a high-profile charity auction weeks later, he assessed her the way he assessed everything: compatibility, alignment, risk. Veronica was polished, educated, connected. She didn't stumble in conversation. She didn't ask naive questions. She knew what she was doing in those rooms, the kind where laughter was measured and smiles were practiced. She also didn't challenge him emotionally. She admired him in the way powerful circles did, with appreciation for what he represented. At first, Cole mistook that for respect. Their early interactions were easy, controlled. Veronica complimented his vision. Cole admired her social intelligence. Together, they looked effortless. And when she stood beside him at events, people reacted like the universe had completed a picture. The headlines were immediate. Tech titan finds his match. Asterian's power couple. A new era for Cyrexan. Cole watched the public response with a detached kind of satisfaction. The strategy was working. When Veronica accepted his proposal, it wasn't after a long emotional journey. It was after a conversation about timelines, expectations, and public plans. One night, as they sat on a terrace overlooking the city, Veronica said, "We can do this elegantly." Cole nodded. "We can." She tilted her head. "You're not nervous?" Cole considered it. "No." Veronica smiled. "Good. Neither am I." They kissed, brief, polished, and perfectly timed for the photographers Veronica had quietly arranged nearby. Cole didn't mind. In his mind, romance was less important than stability. Their wedding was a spectacle: private estate, drone coverage, magazine exclusives, elite guests. It looked like a victory. Cole walked down the aisle with a calm expression that the media interpreted as confidence. Inside, he felt nothing he could name. Not joy, not fear, not excitement. Just completion, like checking off a major milestone. That should have warned him. But Cole was a man trained to trust structure, and structure told him he'd done the right thing. After the wedding, life settled into routines. Veronica traveled for donor luncheons and social commitments. Cole worked late, as always. Their schedules ran parallel, rarely intersecting with warmth. They spoke, but didn't connect. They shared space, but not closeness. They existed as an image, and to maintain the image, they employed staff, including a quiet maid named Nia Brooks, who moved through the penthouse with care and dignity. Cole didn't notice her at first, not because he was cruel, because his mind was trained to focus on what mattered to outcomes. He didn't yet understand that the most important outcomes in life are not measured in profit. And he didn't know, not then, that his biggest life lesson wouldn't come from a boardroom, an investor, or a rival CEO, but from someone who stayed when the lights went out. Veronica Hale was raised in rooms where voices never rose and mistakes were handled quietly, behind closed doors, far from public view. Her childhood unfolded in carefully maintained spaces, historic homes. renovated without altering their character, private schools, with strict dress codes, charity luncheons where children learned early how to sit still, smile softly, and never say too much. Her family didn't flaunt wealth, they assumed it. Money was background noise, not conversation. From a young age, Veronica understood the power of presentation. Her mother taught her how to enter a room without demanding attention, how posture alone could invite it. Her father taught her the importance of names, introductions, and remembering who mattered. Veronica learned which forks to use, how long eye contact should last, when to laugh, and, most importantly, what never to reveal. Feelings were private. Image was public. At 15, she could host a dinner without assistance. At 18, she attended galas as easily as other girls attended house parties. By her 20s, she was a familiar face in Asterian City's upper circles, not because she chased influence, but because she embodied it. Veronica didn't need to speak loudly. She had presence. People described her as elegant, refined, appropriate. She wore clothes that looked effortless but were anything but. Her hair was always in place. Her expressions measured. Her life appeared smooth. She never struggled publicly, never stumbled publicly, never failed publicly. And she believed that was discipline. Veronica didn't see herself as cold. She saw herself as controlled. To her, control was a form of respect for herself, for her family, for the world watching. When she met Cole Sterling, she recognized him instantly, not emotionally, but strategically. He was not flashy, not charming in the conventional sense. He didn't try to impress. That alone set him apart. Veronica noticed how people adjusted themselves around him, how rooms leaned in when he spoke. Power, she knew when she saw it. Cole, in turn, saw in Veronica a familiar pattern, stability, predictability, someone who wouldn't disrupt his carefully structured life. Their conversations stayed on safe ground: philanthropy, business climates, city initiatives. Veronica never pushed for emotional access. She never asked personal questions that required vulnerability. That restraint appealed to Cole. To Veronica, Cole represented alignment, a man whose ambition matched her upbringing, a man whose public presence elevated hers, a man whose life fit neatly into the vision she'd been prepared for since childhood. She admired him the way she'd been taught to admire things of value. From the outside, it looked like chemistry. From the inside, it was compatibility, curated and composed. And in Asterian City's elite world, compatibility was considered more important than passion. When Cole proposed, the response wasn't shock, it was expectation fulfilled. Asterian City's social pages buzzed before the ring was even public. Whispers circulated through donor lists and private dining rooms. By the time the engagement was announced officially, it felt inevitable. The engagement event was held during a charity auction, tasteful, exclusive, and heavily attended. Cameras captured Veronica's poised smile as Cole slipped the ring onto her finger. Applause followed, as if the city itself approved the match. Headlines appeared within hours. Tech Titan secures a legacy match. Asterian's elite unite. Veronica handled the attention gracefully. She always had. She spoke warmly to reporters, praised Cole's vision, and framed their union as a shared commitment to progress and philanthropy. Cole, less comfortable with the spotlight, relied on her ease. Standing beside Veronica made public life smoother. She knew where to stand, when to speak, when to smile. The wedding planning unfolded with precision. Private estate, carefully selected guest list, strict media agreements, exclusive coverage. Every detail was curated for impact. On the day of the wedding, the estate shimmered with quiet luxury. Guests arrived in tailored attire, conversations hushed and respectful. The ceremony itself was flawless. Music timed perfectly, vows delivered calmly, no surprises. Cole stood at the altar composed, focused, aware of every camera angle. Veronica walked toward him with grace, her expression serene. They looked exactly like what everyone wanted them to be. The kiss was elegant, the applause enthusiastic, the photos impeccable. No one noticed what wasn't there. No trembling hands, no laughter breaking through formality. no emotion that couldn't be rehearsed. After the ceremony, Veronica mingled effortlessly. Cole shook hands, accepted congratulations, delivered a short speech about partnership and shared values. The crowd loved it. That night, images flooded social media. Commentators praised the union as perfectly matched. Investors spoke of stability. The public saw assurance. The wedding wasn't just a personal milestone. It was a corporate asset. And Cole believed that was enough, because success in his world had always come from executing the right plan. The penthouse sat 40 floors above a Styrian city, wrapped in glass and quiet. It was breathtaking at first glance. Open spaces, clean lines carefully, chosen art pieces that hinted at taste without revealing personality. Every room felt intentional. Every surface gleamed. It was a place meant to impress. Staff moved through it silently, trained to be efficient and discreet. Everything ran smoothly, meals prepared, rooms cleaned, schedules followed. From the outside, it looked like a dream. From the inside, it felt more like a display. Veronica traveled often. Donor luncheons, fashion events, charity boards that required her presence. When she was home, her time was carefully allocated. Cole's schedule rarely aligned with hers. He worked late, returned tired, and often found the penthouse already quiet. They ate together occasionally, meals that felt more like appointments than connection. Conversation stayed practical, polite, safe. "How was your day?" "Busy." "Same." They shared updates, not intimacy. At night, Cole often retreated to his study, loosening his tie and letting the city's lights wash over him. Jazz records played softly, not for anyone else, just for him. Veronica preferred silence or background television when she was home. She didn't comment on the music. Cole didn't invite her in. The penthouse held echoes of a life that never quite happened. Despite the space, despite the luxury, something was missing. Cole felt it in the quiet moments, when work no longer demanded him, when the city slept, when he had no task to complete. He noticed how the penthouse lacked warmth. Not physical warmth, it was climate controlled to perfection, but emotional warmth. The kind that made spaces feel lived in. He didn't know how to articulate it. He just knew the penthouse felt empty even when it wasn't. And slowly, that emptiness became familiar. The cracks didn't arrive dramatically. They slipped in quietly, through missed dinners, unanswered texts, conversations that never went deeper than logistics. Veronica rarely questioned Cole's late nights. Cole rarely questioned her travel. They respected each other's independence. On paper, it looked healthy. But respect without closeness leaves space unfilled. There were moments, small ones, when Cole sensed the distance. Like the night he returned early and found Veronica already asleep, her side of the bed untouched by warmth. Or the mornings when they passed each other like colleagues exchanging polite greetings. They didn't argue. They didn't fight. They simply existed side by side. Once, during a rare evening together, Cole tried to talk about his work. Not the numbers, but the pressure. "I don't think people realize how much responsibility comes with building something this big," he said quietly. Veronica nodded, eyes on her phone. "That's why you're good at it." He waited for more. None came. Another time, Veronica mentioned a charity project she was passionate about. Cole listened, asked thoughtful questions, offered funding. She smiled. "You're always so supportive." It sounded like praise. It felt like distance. Neither of them said what they were really thinking. Cole told himself this was maturity. That marriage didn't need constant emotional exchange. That stability mattered more. Veronica told herself this was normal. That love didn't have to be intense to be real. That calm was better than chaos. But quiet dissatisfaction settled in. It showed up in the way Veronica lingered longer at events, in the way Cole stayed later at the office, in the way the penthouse felt more like a hotel than a home. Neither of them acknowledged it. And so the marriage continued, impressive, intact, admired. Until one night, when the city went dark, until the systems failed, Until Cole Sterling sat alone in a silent penthouse and realized that applause could not keep you company, and that the cracks he ignored were about to matter more than he ever imagined. Nia Brooks never raised her voice to be noticed. She didn't need to. She was the kind of woman who entered a room and moved like she belonged, not because anyone told her she did, but because her upbringing taught her that quiet strength held more power than performance ever could. Born and raised on the south side of a Styrian city, Nia came from a neighborhood where people didn't have much, but somehow always had enough. Her family home sat on a narrow street lined with weather-worn houses, front porches, with creaking steps, and neighbors who looked out for one another without being asked. Her mother, Miss Eloise, was a church secretary and a seamstress. Her father, Rodney, worked maintenance at a public school and fixed cars in their driveway on weekends. Neither of them had college degrees, but their home was filled with structure, love, and expectations rooted in self-respect. Manners aren't just for company, her mother would say as she ironed Nia's school blouse. They're for your reflection, too. Sundays were sacred, not just for church, but for gathering. Relatives packed into their small home, cousins, aunties, uncles. There was always a pot of something on the stove, music humming from a corner, radio, and someone telling a story that ended in laughter or a lesson. It was in those moments, watching women peel potatoes while balancing babies on their hips, watching men fix broken chairs while debating politics, that Nia learned something most people never got taught outright. Care doesn't always need credit. Nia grew up with that as her compass. She didn't seek the spotlight in school. Still, teachers loved her. She wasn't the loudest at social events. Still, people gravitated toward her for comfort. She moved with humility, but there was never anything small about her presence. Her dream was to become a family therapist, someone who helped people carry what their households couldn't name. But dreams cost money, and her family had already stretched to send her to community college. So after graduation, she worked. Retail first, then hospitality, a short run in elder care. Eventually, she landed a job through a high-end domestic staffing agency that trained professional private service workers for elite homes in the city. It wasn't what she saw herself doing forever, but it was honest work. The agency assigned her to the Sterling residence after an extensive vetting process. She's smart, discreet, and takes initiative, the agency manager had told Veronica. Very detail-oriented. Veronica had simply nodded. We expect nothing less. And just like that, Nia began cleaning a penthouse 40 stories above a city she still took the bus through every morning. Nia never viewed her work as small. She ironed pillowcases like someone might lay their head down needing peace. She folded towels like they mattered. She set tables like family might sit there, even if they rarely did. To some, it looked like routine, but to Nia, every task was a reflection of how she moved through the world. Her mother taught her that dignity was not determined by the work you did, it was how you did it. You don't lower yourself by doing quiet work, Miss Eloise used to say. You reveal yourself. So when Nia entered the Sterling penthouse, she didn't walk timidly. She walked with purpose. She learned the household fast, not just where things belonged, but how things flowed. She noticed which doors creaked slightly, which lights flickered, which parts of the kitchen Veronica never used. She kept her personal life private. No unnecessary stories, no opinions offered unless asked. But if someone was observant enough, they could read the pride in how she moved. She didn't try to impress. She didn't need validation. She brought excellence without asking for applause. Nia was never late, never intrusive, always prepared. She adjusted her pace to avoid disrupting anyone's schedule. She prepped rooms so they looked untouched, but lived in. She placed things back precisely where they were found. And in a home designed for show, her work made it feel functional. She wasn't just cleaning. She was creating the kind of order that allows others to pretend chaos doesn't exist. That's the thing about unseen labor. It only becomes noticeable when it stops. But Nia didn't mind that invisibility. Not at first. To her, being good at what you did, without needing credit, was its own kind of peace. There was a rhythm to the Sterling household, and Nia learned it like a language. The staff was small by design. Veronica preferred a streamlined aesthetic and kept only essential personnel: a rotating chef for events, a part-time interior coordinator, a driver, and Nia, whose title was household assistant, but whose role blurred into everything from housekeeping to errand running to overseeing deliveries. Cole rarely engaged with staff unless necessary. He wasn't rude, just distant, calculated, the kind of man who walked into a room and only spoke if it served a purpose. But Nia noticed things. She noticed how he always loosened his tie exactly 30 seconds after, removing his jacket like a switch turned off once no one was watching. She noticed how his study was the only room in the penthouse with personal energy: records, books, half-finished notes, but was always locked when guests were around. She noticed that Veronica changed staff more often than furniture. Once, the chef forgot to place labels on the meal containers. Veronica called the agency before the man had even left the building. "It's not about the food," she had said sharply to no one in particular. "It's about standards." Nia stayed quiet. She knew her survival in this space depended on never giving anyone a reason to question her presence. Still, she wasn't passive. She learned everyone's tempo. She knew when to vanish before tension surfaced, when to refill the fruit bowl before Veronica returned, when to clear Cole's desk without touching any paper stacks. She also became a silent guardian of peace in the few areas where humanity slipped in, like the kitchen, where Cole sometimes wandered late at night. Nia started leaving small things behind when she finished her shift: a covered plate, a fresh pot of coffee, once a handwritten label with the name of the dish in small, neat cursive folded beside the plate. He never said anything, but the plate was always empty the next morning. And when she returned, the note was always gone. It wasn't the big things that revealed Cole Sterling's loneliness. It was the absence of small ones. Nia began noticing it gradually, not through confessions or stares, but through patterns. Cole often came home late, even when his schedule said otherwise. He moved through the penthouse like someone avoiding stillness, as if silence reminded him of something he couldn't afford to hear. Nia cleaned his study one afternoon while he was in a meeting. The room was meticulous, yet she found a record left on the turntable, paused mid-track. A jazz album, soft and moody, a sound of memory more than entertainment. She paused. No one else in the house ever touched that room. It wasn't part of Veronica's aesthetic. Later, she noticed his sneakers. Old, faded, out of place among the polished wardrobe of tailored suits and designer shoes. They sat on a shelf in the corner of the closet, not decorative, not preserved, just there. Something about them felt sacred. That evening, while tidying the hallway, Nia overheard Veronica on the phone. "Yes, he's brilliant," she said with a sharp edge. "But if he thinks that's enough, he's mistaken. People don't just invest in tech, they invest in how it looks." Nia heard the click of heels retreating. The conversation lingered longer. She didn't tell anyone what she heard. She just understood something deeper. Cole Sterling was admired by many, praised by most, but deeply disconnected in his own home. Not because no one cared, but because no one noticed him when it didn't serve their purpose. He was surrounded by image and function, yet unseen in the ways that mattered. And Nia, quiet, grounded, invisible, became the only one who watched him without trying to manage, measure, or market him. She saw a man carrying a world no one could name. She saw a life scheduled to perfection, but lonely by design. And slowly, something shifted in her. Not attraction, not longing, just attention. The kind of attention that doesn't need to be returned to feel real. Nia never announced what she did. That was the quiet rule she lived by. In the Sterling penthouse, her presence was meant to be functional, efficient, invisible. And she honored that expectation on the surface. But beneath it, she brought something no job description could outline: care that asked for nothing in return. It started with timing. Nia learned the rhythm of the household the way musicians learn a piece, not by forcing it, but by listening. She knew when the penthouse would be empty, when Veronica returned from trips, when Cole's nights ran long. She didn't need schedules posted on the fridge. She noticed patterns. On evenings when Cole stayed late, Nia would prepare a simple meal and leave it warming quietly in the kitchen. Nothing elaborate. Food that felt grounding. Covered, protected, waiting. No note, no explanation, no expectation. Some nights, the plate went untouched. Other nights, it was empty by morning. Nia never mentioned either outcome. She adjusted the study subtly, never rearranging, only aligning. She angled the chair the way Cole preferred, cleared the desk without disturbing the stacks. She dusted the record shelf carefully, always returning the albums in the exact order she found them. When she noticed the worn sneakers tucked behind the expensive shoes, she didn't move them. She cleaned around them instead, as if acknowledging their place without challenging it. In the mornings, she brewed coffee early, even when she wasn't sure he'd be home in time to drink it. Sometimes it went cold, sometimes it didn't. She left clean towels folded the way her mother taught her, edges even, fabric smooth. She refilled the fruit bowl before it emptied. She adjusted the thermostat slightly on colder nights, knowing Cole never remembered to do it himself. These weren't grand gestures. They were attentions, and attentions, when repeated without demand, create a presence that lingers. Nia never lingered herself. She moved in and out of rooms quietly, respecting boundaries. But the effect of her care stayed behind, softening the space long after she'd gone. She never thought of it as kindness. To her, it was simply how you treated a place where people lived, even if those people didn't know how to live together. Cole noticed the changes before he noticed the person. At first, he thought it was coincidence. The study felt less rigid. The air seemed calmer. His shoulders didn't tense the moment he walked through the door anymore, and he couldn't explain why. He started eating more regularly, not because he was suddenly hungry, but because food was there when he needed it. Not pushed, not framed as obligation, just present. One night, he paused in the kitchen, staring at a covered plate. The food was still warm, simple, familiar, the kind of meal that didn't need presentation. He ate standing up, slowly, and realized something unsettled him. It felt like someone had been thinking about him. That realization followed him into the study. The chair was angled exactly how he liked it, something he'd never mentioned aloud. The record he'd left out was cleaned and returned gently, not replaced, just respected. Cole stood still for a moment. He didn't feel watched. He felt considered. That was new. In his world, people reacted to him. They adjusted because of him. But this was different. This wasn't performance or strategy. This was intention. He began noticing it everywhere. The way the penthouse smelled faintly of fresh linen instead of cleaning chemicals. The way his notes were never disturbed. The way the lighting felt softer at night, less harsh. None of it called attention to itself, but all of it made the space feel less like a display and more like somewhere someone lived. Cole found himself staying home more often. Not because he had to, but because the penthouse no longer felt like an echo chamber. He started listening to his records longer, letting them play out instead of cutting them off halfway. And slowly, without realizing it, he began to wonder who was behind these details. The first real conversation didn't begin with anything dramatic. It began with coffee. Cole entered the kitchen one morning earlier than usual. He hadn't slept well. His mind had refused to slow down. He stood by the counter, loosening his tie out of habit, and reached for a mug. The coffee was already brewed. Nia stood at the sink, rinsing fruit. She turned slightly when she sensed him, offering a polite nod. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling." Her voice was calm, respectful, not rehearsed. "Morning," he replied, surprising himself by stopping instead of grabbing the mug and leaving. He poured the coffee, then paused. "You didn't have to make this so early." Nia shrugged lightly. "I noticed you've been coming in earlier lately." The statement wasn't intrusive, just observant. He studied her for a moment. "You notice a lot." She smiled faintly. "It's part of the job." That should have ended the conversation. It didn't. "This coffee," he said, gesturing with the mug. "It's right." Nia tilted her head. "You like it stronger in the mornings." "How do you know that?" She didn't hesitate. You add water at night, not in the morning. Cole blinked. No one had ever paid that kind of attention to him before, not without wanting something in return. I didn't realize that was noticeable, he said. Only if you're looking, she replied. There was no challenge in her tone, no expectation, just truth. From that morning on, small conversations followed. Not daily, not forced. A comment about a record, a brief exchange about the city, a shared observation about how quiet the penthouse felt on certain nights. Nia never asked questions that crossed lines. She never pried. But when Cole spoke, she listened fully. That alone changed the dynamic. One evening, he lingered in the kitchen longer than usual, watching her prepare to leave. "You grew up here?" he asked suddenly. She nodded. "South Side." He nodded too. "Me too." She looked surprised, but didn't press. That shared acknowledgement settled between them, not as a bond yet, just as recognition. They weren't confiding. They were meeting. The contrast didn't need explanation. It revealed itself naturally. With Veronica, conversation felt managed, purposeful. Every exchange served an outcome: visibility, alignment, image. Even affection felt timed. When Veronica entered a room, the air shifted. Not because she was cruel, but because she carried expectation with her. The penthouse adjusted around her presence. With Nia, nothing adjusted. She fit into the space without rearranging it. Veronica spoke about events, schedules, appearances. Nia spoke only when necessary, and when she did, her words were grounded. Veronica praised success. Nia acknowledged effort. Veronica noticed Cole when it served the picture they presented together. Nia noticed him when no one else was watching. One afternoon, Veronica returned unexpectedly early. She walked into the penthouse briskly, phone in hand, heels clicking sharply. "The living room rug looks slightly off," she said without looking at anyone. "Please fix that." Nia nodded. "Of course." Cole watched the exchange from the hallway. Veronica turned to him next. "We're expected at a donor reception tomorrow. Wear the navy suit. It photographs better." He nodded automatically. Veronica kissed his cheek quickly and moved on, already speaking into her phone. The contrast hit him then, not as resentment, but as clarity. With Veronica, he was part of a presentation. With Nia, he was simply present. That realization unsettled him, not because he wanted anything from Nia, but because she offered something he hadn't realized he'd been missing: ease, understanding without pressure, care without demand. Cole didn't name it yet, but the seed had been planted, and once planted, it would not stay quiet forever. Veronica Hale Sterling walked into every room like it belonged to her. Not with arrogance, at least not the loud kind, but with the silent expectation that her presence mattered more than the space itself. Her routines were rigid, her tastes selective, her standards high, unspoken but heavy. In the Sterling penthouse, she didn't shout, didn't throw tantrums, didn't demand in public. But her criticism was sharp, cloaked in politeness, and delivered with the precision of someone who'd mastered the art of sounding reasonable while cutting deep. She found faults others didn't see. A fingerprint on a mirrored tray. That's not acceptable. A throw pillow slightly angled wrong. Someone was careless. A misplaced charger. This household should reflect order. She didn't raise her voice. She lowered it, made it colder. Cole, for a long time, didn't challenge it. He'd chosen Veronica, after all. Their marriage had been an equation: elegance plus reputation plus shared goals equal to stability. Emotion had never been the driving force, and Veronica knew that. Perhaps that's why she never tried to fake affection, but criticism filled the silence between them. Not just towards staff, but toward Cole, too. "You missed the gala," she said once, stepping out of a car in a deep green gown, still fresh with flash photography. People noticed. "I had a late call with the Asia team," Cole said. "Everyone has late calls, but they show up for what matters." He didn't reply. Other times, her words came dressed in passive remarks. "You didn't shave this morning. That's unusual. I told them you prefer navy, but you wore grey. I had to speak alone during the panel. I assumed that wasn't planned. To an outsider, it would sound like partnership, but to Cole, it felt like surveillance. Veronica had never once asked how he felt about anything. Not about work, not about family, not about them. She didn't notice when his shoulders sagged. She didn't ask about the records in his study. She didn't wonder why he sat alone most nights in a home designed for two. And when she offered affection, it came with commentary. A kiss followed by, "Don't forget the board meeting starts at 10. A hand on his chest followed by, "Try to smile more in the photos." She treated him the way one managed a brand, always refining, always redirecting, always correcting. And while Cole never shouted back, a part of him began to shrink. The emotional detachment didn't arrive all at once. It revealed itself in how often they spoke without listening, touched without feeling, lived without connecting. And Veronica, so trained in image, never noticed the man beside her was quietly slipping away. Where Veronica brought sharp edges, Nia brought quiet edges smoothed by patience. She didn't insert herself into conflict. She didn't respond to tension with defensiveness. She observed. She adapted. She eased the weight of rooms without asking for credit. In moments when Veronica snapped or muttered about imperfections, Nia didn't react with retreat. She responded with steadiness. Once, Veronica walked into the kitchen midday and spotted a dish towel on the counter. "This wasn't folded," she said, voice clipped. "Why is it here?" Nia was standing near the sink. "I was wiping down the glassware and hadn't replaced it yet." "It'll be folded now." Veronica gave a tight nod and walked out. No defensiveness, no justification. Nia handled it with composure that disarmed even the sharpest critique. Cole happened to witness that exchange. He said nothing at the time, but it stuck with him. On another occasion, Veronica returned early from a gallery showing and found a flower arrangement on the entryway table. "These lilies are out of season," she said, voice calm but loaded. "I thought we agreed on a winter theme." Nia was across the room, arranging pillows. She turned, meeting the comment not with explanation, but with grace. "They were part of a delivery mix-up from the florist. I placed them here temporarily. I can remove them now." Veronica hesitated, then nodded. "Do that." Later that evening, Cole stood by the flowers before they were discarded. He leaned in, took a breath of their scent, faint, delicate, and looked across the room where Nia was quietly setting out glassware. "Did you choose these?" he asked. "I accepted them," she replied simply. That answer lingered. It wasn't just what Nia did that impacted the house. It was how she did it. Her actions weren't reactive. They were rooted, thoughtful. She didn't speak often, but when she did, she didn't just fill space. She balanced it. And in a home where perfection was demanded, her calm presence became something Cole found himself depending on, not in words, not in moments, but in the atmosphere she brought with her. Cole wasn't confused. He knew what the world saw when they looked at him and Veronica, a polished couple, wealthy and respected, balanced in appearance and ambition. It was a portrait that made sense, symmetrical, safe. But it wasn't real, and the more time passed, the more that truth pressed against him in subtle, unrelenting ways. He'd find himself watching Veronica across a dinner table, her fingers scrolling. Through guest lists, her lips reciting social obligations like a speech. And then he'd walk into the kitchen and notice how the dish towel had been folded with care. How his coffee was brewed just the way he preferred it. How the record in his study was dusted and returned without shifting its position. No fanfare. No reminders, just quiet consistency. One night, after a particularly exhausting charity event, Veronica fell asleep before changing out of her gown. Cole stood in the hallway outside their bedroom, still in his dress shirt, tie loosened, head fogged. He walked into the kitchen. Nia was cleaning. Quietly, her earbuds were in, soft music playing. She hadn't noticed him yet. He stood there, watching her move. Graceful. Purposeful, not performing for anyone. She turned and saw him. Removed one earbud. "Sorry, didn't hear you come in." "No need to apologize," he said. "I just needed air." She nodded, didn't push. After a pause, he said, "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" Nia looked at him carefully. "I think a lot of people feel that way. Especially when they've spent so much time trying to live the right one." He swallowed. "What if you don't know what the right one is anymore?" She didn't smile. She didn't offer a pretty answer. Instead, she said, "Then maybe you stop trying to perform it and start trying to feel it." He nodded, not trusting himself to say more. That night, he didn't sleep. Not because of desire, not because of guilt, because the space between who he was in public and who he was becoming in private was growing harder to ignore. It happened slowly, not in a confession, not in a sudden spark, but in the pauses, in the glances, in the stillness between interactions. Cole began noticing when Nia wasn't around. He didn't look for her, but when she wasn't in the room, the air felt incomplete. The rhythm of the penthouse shifted. He'd pass by the hallway and hope to hear her humming faintly under her breath. He'd check the kitchen for that familiar plate, even when he wasn't hungry. He'd walk into his study and pause, half expecting a small gesture that proved someone had been there, not to clean but to care. He started asking her quiet questions. "How's your family? How long have you worked here? Do you ever wish you'd chosen something different?" She always answered with honesty, never embellishment. In turn, she never asked for details about his life. That restraint mattered. It made Cole feel safe. Their interactions remained professional, respectful, but something deeper had taken root, an emotional reliance that neither of them named. Veronica never noticed. She was too focused on perception, too wrapped in maintaining the image. Cole noticed, because with Nia, there were no roles to play, no events to prepare for, no posture to maintain. She didn't want anything from him, no connection to his name, no access to his fortune, no place in his spotlight. She only offered what most people forgot how to give: presence, steadiness, a kind of loyalty that existed without announcement. He didn't call it love, not yet. But he knew that whatever it was real. And in a life where everything had been chosen for strategy, real was becoming hard to ignore. The storm began with warnings. The city's alert system sent notifications mid-afternoon, brief buzzes on screens that most people ignored at first. A surge from the outer districts, heading toward Asterion City's center. Fast-moving, unseasonal, the kind of storm that meteorologists described in cautious terms, but never expected to hit hard. Cole noticed the alert on his dashboard while reviewing data projections in his office. "Storm activity increasing in District 7, it read. "Potential infrastructure overload in low-lying areas." He clicked it away without concern. The Sterling penthouse sat at the heart of the skyline, 40 floors above the chaos. Its walls were reinforced glass, its systems smart, responsive, and self-correcting. Power disruptions weren't his concern. Not here. Not in a building with private generators, triple redundancy, and the best security firm in the country. Or so he thought. The sky darkened by early evening. Heavy clouds rolled over the city, painting everything in shades of ash. What started as rain became something heavier. Sharp bursts against windows, winds that howled between towers, pressure that shifted the atmosphere in unsettling ways. By 6:47 p.m., city traffic lights were blinking in erratic patterns. By 7:12 p.m., reports of electrical surges started appearing on the news ticker. By 7:18 p.m., Power Grid Sector B collapsed, and at 7:23 p.m., the tower that housed the Sterling residence lost all external connection. For a moment, the penthouse flickered. Lights blinked once. Then everything died. Screens, sound, control panels, power locks, backup displays, all of it gone. The silence was immediate and thick. The temperature dropped slightly as the automated climate system failed. The once comfortable hum of hidden machines faded, replaced by a hollow stillness. Cole stood in the center of his study, staring at the black monitors in front of him. His hands hovered above a keyboard that no longer responded. No signal, no control. He tried to activate the voice assistant. Nothing. Tried the wall-mounted override screen. Still nothing. The room felt suddenly smaller. He walked to the window, looked out at the city. What he saw made his stomach tighten. Blocks of downtown were black. Streetlights out. Emergency vehicles crawling through the dark. Asterion, the city known for precision, was stumbling into confusion. Cole's phone buzzed once. Signal lost. Then it, too, died. The silence inside the penthouse wasn't just about the absence of noise. It was about the absence of control. Every system Cole had relied on, automated locks, biometric access, surveillance feeds, backup generators, had failed. The emergency lights in the hallway never came on. The temperature dropped degree by degree as the night pressed in. He moved through the penthouse slowly, trying switches, testing outlets, opening a secure cabinet with manual codes. Nothing responded. The power outage hadn't just been inconvenient, it had stripped the building's intelligence bare. Downstairs, elevator access halted. The front desk line returned static. The internal security system didn't even beep. Cole walked past the kitchen. It, too, was dark. A gust of wind rattled against the glass panes, not enough to threaten the structure, but enough to make him pause. He checked the panel on the front door. The lock, digital and sophisticated, was frozen. He sighed, then moved to the closet to grab his flashlight. When he opened it, a small emergency lantern sat on the shelf instead. Compact, already charged. He didn't remember placing it there. The moment felt off, just enough to jolt him. He turned it on. The lantern filled the space with a soft, warm glow. Footsteps behind him. He turned. Nia stood at the far end of the hallway, calm, holding a bag with more emergency supplies. "I checked the pantry and the lower storage units," she said. "We're stocked. The building's backup generator is either overloaded or offline." Cole blinked. "You already checked?" She nodded once. "I've been through this before." He didn't ask when. He didn't need to. She handed him a backup battery pack. "This will give your phone a few hours." But no signal, so he accepted it. Quietly, Nia moved toward the kitchen, setting candles on the counter in a stable row. She moved efficiently. No panic, no performance. The penthouse was still dark, still silent, but with her presence, it didn't feel unstable anymore. Veronica returned 15 minutes later. The door opened with a loud groan, one of the few still working on an internal battery. She entered fast, wrapped in a designer coat, heels soaked from the rain, phone held up like it might save her. "Cole," she called, voice high. The car stalled halfway through Midtown. "What is going on?" He met her in the foyer, lantern in hand. "Power grid failure," he said. "Something big. Systems are down. No signal." She stared at him. "No signal?" He nodded. "No security? No power? No Wi-Fi? No satellite? No emergency override?" He said nothing. Veronica's voice shifted instantly, from shock to irritation. "Do you know how this looks? We have guests flying in tomorrow, donors expecting updates. There's an art showing next week, and I'm supposed to host a preview for the foundation here." Cole didn't respond. She paced, eyes darting from the dark hallway to the candlelit kitchen. "This is embarrassing," she muttered. "What kind of billionaire can't keep his house powered in a storm?" That stung, but he didn't show it. "It's the grid," he said. "Citywide." "Well, we're not citywide, we're above citywide," she snapped. "You built the systems, Cole. You're supposed to be above this." He clenched his jaw. Veronica's fingers moved over her phone screen again, desperate for a signal. Nia entered from the kitchen, setting a small tray down with hot tea, brewed using her portable gas stove. Veronica glanced at it, then looked away. "What are we drinking? Campfire tea now?" She scoffed. Nia didn't respond. She simply turned and walked back toward the pantry. Cole noticed that. He noticed everything in that moment. Veronica's panic, her refusal to adjust, her instinct to blame, to distance, to demand, and Nia's opposite response, grounded, unshaken, present. Veronica paced back toward the door, her words louder now. "I'm not staying here. There's got to be a hotel downtown still running on backup. I'll call the driver. Elevators aren't working," Cole said calmly. "I'll take the stairs. Nia and I already checked," he said. "It's not safe right now. I don't care. I'm not staying in this tomb." She grabbed her clutch and stormed into the bedroom. Cole didn't follow. He just turned back to the lantern, watching its glow flicker gently on the wall. By 9:12 p.m., Veronica had packed an overnight bag and changed into dry clothes. She emerged from the bedroom with a scarf around her neck, a sleek coat zipped to the collar, and the kind of expression that made staff step out of her path. Cole stood near the window, watching rain cascade against the glass. "I've arranged a pickup 2 blocks away," she said. "The driver is waiting at the base of Tower 3. That building still has power." He turned. "It's not safe to walk through Midtown right now." She tightened her grip on the bag handle. "It's not safe for my reputation to sit here in the dark." There was nothing more to say. He didn't stop her. She walked toward the elevator, knowing full well it was offline. She'd already mapped out the emergency stair access through the service corridor. When she reached the foyer, she paused for just a second. "If the press calls," she said coldly, "tell them I was attending a scheduled charity meeting. Don't mention this." And she was gone. The door closed behind her. The echo lingered longer than her presence ever had. Cole remained still. The penthouse felt darker, heavier. He looked down at the cup of tea left on the side table. Steam still rose faintly from it. Behind him, Nia's voice broke the silence. "I'll stay." He turned slowly. She was standing near the hall, calm, hands tucked in front of her, lantern casting light around her frame. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she replied. She didn't say it to be heroic. She wasn't posturing. She was simply staying, because she knew someone had to. She lit a few more candles, checked the locks, placed a warm blanket on the armrest of the sofa without saying a word. Then she returned to the kitchen, preparing a quiet meal on the stove she'd used before. Cole didn't move. He couldn't, because something inside him had shifted. This was the first time in years someone had stayed, not because they had to, not because they were paid to, not because it made them look good, but because they chose to. And in that moment, in the silence of a city on pause, Cole understood that. Everything, every system, every marriage, every structure, meant nothing if no one stayed when it failed. The blackness in the penthouse was thick, unfamiliar, almost unnerving. It wasn't just the absence of light, but the absence of control. The screens had gone dark. The glass doors no longer responded to voice commands. The seamless perfection of Cole Lansing's world had blinked out, and for the first time in years, his empire felt powerless. But in the kitchen, one small flame flickered. Nia lit another candle with a quiet steadiness that contrasted the tension humming through the space. While others scrambled to call building management or check their phones in vain, she moved with purpose, lighting. A pathway of soft golden glows that cast gentle shadows across the sleek countertops and cold marble floors. A maid shouldn't be the calmest person in a tech billionaire's blackout, but she was. Veronica had stormed into the bedroom earlier, already blaming someone. Cole's team was stuck in the elevator for a while before backup generators clicked into place. Guests from the cocktail gathering hours earlier had left, some whispering about how this never happened. At Layla Chandler's place, others texting furiously, forgetting their apps wouldn't load. But Nia? She remained centered. She boiled water over the gas stove with a match, made tea, and brought a wool blanket from the hallway closet into the den. "Cold creeps in faster than you think when the power's out," she murmured, wrapping it around the shoulders of a shivering assistant. She checked on everyone who remained. She even had a small lantern she used when power flickered in her own neighborhood. She brought it in from her tote bag tucked in the laundry closet. Her presence made the penthouse feel less like a malfunctioning tower, and more like a home that simply needed light, warmth, and patience. She didn't need to be asked. She didn't wait for orders. She just cared. Cole noticed. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, phone dead, backup systems jammed, Veronica shouting somewhere in the distance. He watched Nia calmly hand someone a cup of tea, then silently collect stray shoes and coats. She even comforted the dog, who whimpered without the familiar ambient noise that usually played through the speakers. She looked radiant, not because of the candlelight, but because in the collapse of automation, her humanity lit the room. He didn't say anything, but he felt it. Something inside him was shifting, and he wasn't sure he could stop it. Cole Lansing had spent his life engineering systems that anticipated need before the user knew they had one. His smart home adjusted lighting to match his mood, scheduled meetings, ordered his food, and even synthesized custom scents into the air depending on the time of day. Every corner of his life was designed for efficiency. No chaos, no interruptions, no discomfort. But tonight, nothing responded. He tried rebooting the systems. Nothing. Tried the manual override on the walls. Dead. Tried Veronica. But she wasn't in any mood for comfort or logic. "This is humiliating," she hissed, throwing her phone down. "Why would you even host people here if your tech couldn't handle a basic weather shift?" Cole didn't answer. Not because he didn't have one, but because for the first time in his adult life, he couldn't think clearly. He paced the edge of the living room, breathing shallow. The stillness was overwhelming. His mind reached for the usual digital hum, the auto-climate controls, the soft screen of news in the background, but all of it was gone. Even the biometric lock on his study was frozen. He couldn't even distract himself with work. "I need to get out of here," he muttered. But going down 50 floors in a high-rise without elevator service wasn't an option. It was quiet. Too quiet. He sat on the edge of the glass coffee table, head in his hands. It wasn't just the blackout, it was what it exposed. For all his wealth, connections, data, and brilliance, he was helpless in the dark. And yet, just down the hallway, Nia's candle-lit kitchen glowed like it belonged in another world. He could hear her laugh gently with one of the junior house staff. No panic, no performance, just warmth. He swallowed hard. His chest felt tight, like emotion trying to surface after years of being compressed under code and command. For the first time in a very long time, Cole Lansing realized he didn't know how to just exist, without a device, without a plan, without power, and that scared him more than any failure in his systems. Cole found her in the small den near the guest wing. The hallway flickered with her lantern, now stationed on a side table. She was sitting on the floor with her knees drawn to her chest, sipping tea. A half-empty thermos sat beside her. She looked up as he stepped in. "I figured you wouldn't sleep tonight," she said softly, gesturing to the floor beside her. He hesitated, then joined her. There were no titles between them, no tech, no expectations, just silence for a while, until he finally spoke. "You're calm in chaos. You learn," she replied. "When you grow up without things that work unless you make them." He glanced at her. "I've never had to live like that," he admitted. "I know." The air between them wasn't awkward. It was honest. "I built all this so I'd never have to feel what I felt when I was broke," he said, rubbing his temples. "And yet tonight, it all failed. And you're still here." "I don't feel like myself," he confessed. She turned to him. "Maybe that's not a bad thing." He looked at her, unsure what she meant. She continued, "Sometimes we build versions of ourselves to survive a season, but then the season changes, and we don't. We keep performing. But our soul, it's exhausted." His throat tightened. "How do you know all this?" "I pay attention," she whispered. And he realized he had spent years being observed by the world, analyzed by investors, stalked by press, but never really seen. Nia saw him, not the title, not the empire, just him. He closed his eyes, leaned his head back against the wall, and exhaled deeply. "I don't know how to be this version of me," he said. "You don't have to have the answers," she replied. "You just have to be willing to stop pretending you already do." They sat like that for a long time. No one came looking. No alarms, no noise. Just two people who weren't supposed to be in the same room, in the same moment, becoming human together. Morning came slowly. The skyline of San Francisco appeared hazy behind the rain-streaked glass. Backup power had returned in the middle of the night, but the systems rebooted slowly. The lights remained off in the den where Cole and Nia sat, still in silence, bathed in soft grey dawn. He hadn't fallen asleep, but he hadn't moved either. He looked at her again, her hair pulled back loosely, her sweatshirt soft at the collar, the outline of a person who had been invisible for too long. "I used to think love had to be grand," he said finally. "Fireworks, speeches, proposals in the sky." Nia smiled faintly. "That sounds exhausting." He chuckled. "It is." He shifted, turning toward her. "But last night, sitting on this floor, no power, no prep, that was the most peace I've felt in years." She didn't interrupt. He continued. "With Veronica, everything is curated, every gesture calculated, every photo for something. I thought that was love, showing the world we had something worth admiring. And now," he took a breath, "now I think love should feel like safety, like something steady, even when everything around it flickers." She nodded slowly. "Love isn't always loud. Sometimes it just stays when everyone else leaves." He reached for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. And they sat there. No performance, no script, no projections of the future, just a quiet acknowledgement that something real had begun. In the stillness, after the storm, truth had found them, not in declarations or vows, but in the courage to be unmasked and still be held. The power came back with a soft hum. It wasn't dramatic, no surge of energy, no loud return of lights. It was just there, like a slow breath in the air, the flicker of lights in the hallway, the soft glow of digital screens returning to life, the hum of the climate control systems starting up. But something had changed. Cole stood in the center of the penthouse as the city's pulse returned to the tower. He watched the automated systems adjust around him, bringing back the routines, the perfect flow. The backup generators, now fully functioning, kicked in silently as if the world hadn't paused just hours ago. But Cole felt the silence in his chest, the kind that no amount of power could fill. The glow from the windows lit up the room, and everything resumed. Screens began, flashing data again. Soft lights illuminated his workspace. The aroma of the freshly brewed coffee from the kitchen filled the air, but all he could feel was the weight of what had been left behind during the blackout. The storm had been just an external disruption, but the truth it unveiled was a different kind of storm, one that had nothing to do with the weather. Cole had been functioning on autopilot for so long, surrounded by systems that controlled every aspect of his life. It took a blackout for him to realize he had no idea how to exist without them. And now that they were restored, he didn't know how to return to the life he had been living. His eyes moved over the apartment, the sleek lines, the pristine decor, the silent hum of systems functioning perfectly again. Everything was in place, everything had resumed, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it no longer mattered. As the lights flickered back on, Veronica was already preparing herself for the meetings that had been delayed. She came out of the bedroom with a dry smile, a polished version of herself. "I'm glad it's back," she said, but her words sounded rehearsed. "I've already contacted the office. They'll be able to reset the schedule by noon." Cole simply nodded. Good. But his mind wasn't on the schedule. It was on the spaces between them, the quiet, the coldness he had felt even before the lights went out. The storm outside had passed, but the storm inside him still raged. He stood at the window, watching the city below, feeling the absence of connection more profoundly now that the external forces had been removed. And there, in the midst of all the restored perfection, he couldn't help but wonder if the city had ever truly been alive, or if it too was simply a display of lights and glass, a facade of life without meaning. With the power back on, life resumed its usual speed. Veronica quickly shifted into her routine. Calls were made. Emails were sent. The calendar was reset, and everything started to look polished again. But Cole couldn't step back into his old rhythm. The silence, the absence of authenticity, had seeped into him during the blackout, and no amount of power or activity could cover it up. He found himself staring at the reflection of the skyline in the glass walls of the penthouse, lost in thought. The image of the city looked almost too perfect to be true, and suddenly that image felt like his life. Polished, impressive, functional, but without depth. Veronica moved around him like a well-rehearsed performance. She'd picked out the outfits for the meetings she had scheduled for the day, and everything was done with the precision of someone who had mastered this life. She didn't even notice the emptiness in his eyes, the distance that had settled between them. He looked at her now as she fussed over her appearance in front of the mirror, adjusting her blouse, making sure she looked impeccable for the cameras. He noticed the way she cared about her appearance. He noticed the way she lived her life as a display. Everything had to be flawless, and anything less than perfect was swept under the rug. Their marriage had never been about emotional connection. It had been about convenience, about strategy. They both knew the unspoken rules, the need for appearance, the image of stability they had to maintain in front of the world. But now, in the silence after the blackout, Cole realized that his entire life had been structured around a carefully constructed illusion. They had lived in a world of perfection, but they had never truly lived together. The question nagged at him: why had he married Veronica? Was it truly love? Or was it a calculated decision to secure his place in society, to maintain the image he had worked so hard to create? Veronica didn't understand. She didn't even ask. She never asked what he felt, what he needed, what he wanted. And Cole knew, deep down, he couldn't continue living in a marriage where love was a concept, not a feeling. The question he kept coming back to was this: what was missing? And with that thought, it became clear. What was missing wasn't something he could buy. It wasn't a high-end dinner or a glass of champagne. It wasn't a perfectly timed photo op or a meeting with the right investors. What was missing was real connection, emotional honesty, understanding without calculation. He'd let it go too long, buried it beneath his success, beneath the routines. But now that he saw it, now that he felt it, he couldn't ignore it. He wasn't just disconnected from Veronica, he was disconnected from himself. It wasn't sudden. There was no dramatic confrontation, no explosive argument that sent everything crashing to the ground. Their marriage unraveled quietly, respectfully, even tenderly. Cole knew it was time to face the truth, but he didn't know how to do it. He wasn't sure how to tell Veronica that their marriage had become more of a performance than a partnership. But he couldn't pretend anymore. So, he started small. He began spending more time away from the penthouse. Work had always been his escape, but now it became a way to distance himself emotionally. Every time he returned, he found it harder to look at the life they had built together. The displays of wealth, the constant need for validation, the perfect photos, they all felt like distractions from the real issues. Veronica didn't ask where he went. She didn't notice his silence. Instead, she focused on her own life, maintaining her schedule, her appearances, her responsibilities. She didn't demand his attention anymore, not because she didn't care, but because she had learned to exist without him emotionally. Cole started to recognize the emotional distance in their marriage, the absence of affection, the lack of genuine connection. They no longer communicated in the way they once had. Their conversations had become transactional, about schedules, about events, about what needed to be done. And in that silence, Cole realized he no longer wanted to live this way. It wasn't an angry decision. It wasn't a sudden realization that Veronica was the wrong person for him. It was simply the understanding that they were no longer compatible, not because of anything external, but because they had both lost touch with each other over time. He realized he was living with someone who didn't see him, not really, and he didn't see her either. They had both built walls around themselves, walls that no longer made the effort to break down. The unraveling was slow. It was respectful. It was inevitable. Cole didn't know when they had stopped living together in any meaningful way. But the moment he acknowledged it, he knew what had to happen next. Nia had been quiet for days after the storm, her actions steady, but her mind racing. She had stayed when Veronica left, when Cole seemed lost in his thoughts. She had made her choice, not just to remain in the penthouse, but to continue her role without stepping over any boundaries. But the silence between her and Cole had changed. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the presence of something unspoken, something unaddressed. She noticed how Cole's gaze lingered a little longer than it should. She noticed how he sought her presence in small ways, making eye contact, sitting nearby, when she was in the kitchen, offering her a quiet smile when she entered a room. But Nia knew she had to maintain boundaries. She had been hired to help run the home, to care for the space, but she wasn't there to offer emotional refuge. She wasn't there to fill a gap in Cole's life that had nothing to do with the work she had been given. She considered leaving, not out of resentment or anger, but out of respect. It would be better, she thought, if she left before things grew more complicated. She wasn't supposed to be an emotional crutch. She wasn't supposed to be the one Cole leaned on when everything else crumbled. But Nia also understood something deep inside. There was no such thing as integrity in hiding from what was real. Leaving would preserve the boundaries, yes, but it would also silence the truth. And Nia had learned long ago that truth, when ignored, didn't stay hidden. It found a way to rise, quiet, steady, like the flame of a candle burning in a room full of shadows. The morning light poured gently into the penthouse suite, no longer stark or artificial from backup systems. Natural warmth replaced the glow of machine precision. Yet it was quiet, unsettlingly quiet. Cole stood by the long window, watching the skyline. The city below buzzed with its usual rhythm again. But inside him, everything was different. He'd woken up alone, not just physically, but in the deeper sense that could no longer be filled by technology or staff or status. Veronica had packed a few things and quietly left the previous evening. No argument, no theatrics, just an ending. He thought back to the night before, the stillness, the candles, Nia's voice, calming his spiraling thoughts when the world around him stopped working. She hadn't tried to fix him. She'd just been there. Now, she wasn't. Nia had taken her break hours before sunrise, slipping away like someone who knew her place wasn't guaranteed. Cole hadn't stopped her, not because he didn't want to, but because it wasn't his right. Not anymore. Later that day, he found her in the service garden behind the building. She was tending to the herbs she planted for the kitchen months ago, basil, thyme, mint, all thriving under her touch. Cole didn't interrupt her work. He stood at a respectful distance and waited until she noticed him. When she looked up, her eyes didn't shine like they once did, but they didn't close off either. That gave him a thread of hope. "I'm not here to pull you into anything," Cole said quietly. "Not with promises or apologies. I owe you presence. The kind that listens, not the kind that commands." Nia rose to her feet slowly, brushing the dirt from her gloves. "You don't owe me anything, Cole," she said simply. "You just owe yourself the truth." "I think," he said, voice catching. "That's what I've been scared of all along." There was no dramatic embrace, no declarations, just the kind of pause that allowed space between two people to breathe again. Over the next few weeks, distance became a silent agreement between Cole and Nia. Not avoidance, just room. Room to think, room to respect. Nia returned to her usual duties, but it was no longer about clocking hours. She moved through the penthouse like someone who knew her worth had nothing to do with her role. She didn't overextend or retreat. She simply existed with quiet dignity, and Cole noticed every bit of it. He didn't crowd her. He didn't try to win her over with grand gestures or cold logic. Instead, he focused inward, on therapy, on removing the digital noise in his life, on facing the parts of himself that he'd built walls around. He started spending evenings alone on the balcony, no devices, no assistants, just a notepad and silence. One afternoon, he saw her reading on her break in the common courtyard. Instead of walking over, he left a cup of jasmine tea near the bench with a sticky note, "For the heart that helped mine remember how to beat." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The restraint between them wasn't cold. It was warm, protective. It was the kind of stillness that let something new begin, slowly and with intention. When Cole had to leave town for a week-long investor summit, He told her, "You don't owe me your weight, but if you're still here when I get back, I'll take that as a reason to keep trying." Nia's reply was simple. "Try for yourself first. If you can do that, we'll talk." When Cole returned, he didn't arrive with fanfare. No private jet entourage, no press conference. Just a quiet knock at the service entrance. Nia opened the door herself. "I told the staff to take the weekend off," he said. "Wanted to cook something real." "You cook now?" she asked with an arched brow. "I burn things mostly," he admitted, "but I've been learning. Thought maybe you'd supervise?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. In the kitchen, he tried to follow her instructions as she guided him through making a simple vegetable stir-fry. There was laughter, tentative but healing. When he dropped the soy sauce bottle, she laughed, until her stomach ached. Cole didn't mind being clumsy anymore. Not if it meant seeing her smile like that again. Later, they sat across from each other at the dining table, not as CEO and maid, not as broken man and caretaker, but simply as two people meeting in the middle. "I used to think love needed to look a certain way," Cole confessed. "Flashy, flawless, instant. But it's in the pauses, isn't it? It's in the showing up," Nia replied softly. "Even when you don't know what to say." Their fingers brushed near the center of the table. No one reached further, but the contact stayed. That evening, she didn't stay over. She didn't need to. Love wasn't a prize to claim. It was a garden to tend, day by day. Weeks passed. Autumn crept in. The air grew crisp, and the city took on a calmer rhythm. So did they. Cole had given up the idea of rebuilding his marriage, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Veronica had filed for divorce quietly, and he didn't contest it. Their final exchange was brief, civil, and without venom. He and Nia didn't label what they were. There were no ultimatums or titles, just two souls reconnecting where silence had once lived. Sometimes she stayed over. Sometimes she didn't. Sometimes they shared meals in quiet. Sometimes they laughed like teenagers over burnt cookies and mismatched socks. There was one night, cold, with rain tapping against the windows, where Cole wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and said, "If you ever want to walk away, I'll understand. But I'm here. No scripts, no perfection. Just me." Nia rested her head against his shoulder and whispered, "Then stay. But stay real." He didn't kiss her in that moment, not because he didn't want to, but because some love is built by what you wait for, not what you rush. They didn't need a spotlight. They needed peace. And for the first time in Cole's life, he chose it over power. And for the first time in Nia's life, she felt safe choosing someone, because he wasn't asking her to shrink. Cole sat alone on the edge of the balcony in his restored brownstone, a far cry from the sterile penthouse he once called home. The late morning sun filtered through the linen curtains, warm and unpretentious. It wasn't luxury that touched him anymore. It was sunlight, silence, and the steady rhythm of his own breathing. Success had changed its face. It was no longer about glowing earnings reports or being praised in Forbes. It was watching the plants on his kitchen sill grow because he remembered to water them. It was having enough space in his day to pause and think, "How do I feel?" When Cole had stepped down from the board of Ashford Tech a few months back, people thought he'd lost his edge. But the truth was, he'd finally found it. The version of himself that used to chase headlines didn't exist anymore, not after the night the lights went out, and the woman he once overlooked held his world together with a calm hand and unwavering heart. He took long walks now, no security detail, no calls from 3 different assistants. He visited small cafes where no one knew his net worth. He picked up books without summaries on the back, choosing them simply because a title stirred something in him. He donated quietly, without tax benefits attached, and volunteered under a different name, cleaning up parks and painting murals with teenagers who didn't know or care who he used to be. One of his old colleagues had once said, "Cole, you are the brand." But Cole was learning how to be a person instead. He still invested, still advised a few startups, but it was no longer for domination. It was for impact. Projects that focused on education, renewable energy, mental health in underserved communities. His team was leaner now. He called them by name, asked about their families. When they celebrated a win, it wasn't in a champagne room. It was in the break room, with dollar store streamers and homemade brownies. He hadn't expected peace to feel this real. But perhaps the most shocking part of his transformation wasn't his career pivot. It was that he no longer needed applause to feel alive. Cole's return to the public eye came quietly. No press conference, no dramatics. Just a panel appearance at a local business college, where he spoke not of dominance, but of balance. He answered questions with clarity, but without arrogance. He told students that being first meant nothing if you ended up alone, that profits without purpose would eventually poison you. His words weren't rehearsed, they were real, and the sincerity in his voice left an impression. Over time, the press softened, not because of PR manipulation, but because Cole stopped feeding the narrative. No more appearances with trophy partners, no extravagant travel logs. His private life was private, but in the spaces that mattered, the spaces where real life lived, his world had depth again. Nia, she no longer worked for him, not even part-time. Their dynamic had changed, organically, without performance. She had returned to her classes, pursuing a degree in family counseling. When he brought her flowers now, it wasn't out of guilt. It was gratitude. And when she smiled at him, it wasn't out of obligation. It was choice. They cooked together. Well, mostly she did the cooking, and he fumbled through the prep. They talked about everything from movies to faith, to where their childhood scars still ached. Sometimes they disagreed. That too was new and healthy. He didn't dominate the conversation. She didn't shrink. They listened. He stopped interrupting. She stopped assuming she had to explain herself twice. One night, Nia left her hair bonnet in his bathroom. He smiled like a man who had won something bigger than a deal. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't even romantic in the traditional sense. But it was intimate. His public life was manageable. His private life was meaningful. The greatest stabilizer in his world wasn't a product or a profit margin. It was a woman who folded her own laundry with grace and still found joy in the smell of fresh books. For Nia, love had always felt like something she had to earn. In the past, it came with strings, with sacrifices that left her gasping for air. But now it felt different. Because Cole never asked her to give up herself to love him. She still taught her Sunday school class, still met with her friends at the community garden. She still said no when her time or energy couldn't stretch. And the beautiful thing was, Cole respected it, admired it even. He'd told her one afternoon, as they sat under a modest tree at the park, "You being you is the reason I breathe better." She didn't blush. She just believed him. Nia no longer tiptoed around her worth. She no longer over-explained her boundaries. She made space for joy, rest, and ambition. Her life was not an accessory to his, it was its own blooming, grounded path. They didn't rush things. No big proposals or flashy Instagram stories. Just consistency. Just presence. Just truth. When Cole asked her to accompany him to a fundraising dinner, not as his date, but as someone he respected, she accepted because she wanted to, not because she felt obligated. When people asked her what it was like to date the billionaire, she gently corrected them. "I'm not dating a billionaire. I'm loving a man. And there's a difference." She had no intention of being consumed by someone else's orbit. She had built her own light. And instead of asking her to dim it, Cole adjusted his own to make space for both. Nia was no longer a maid. She was no longer the woman in the shadows of someone else's empire. She was building something too. Quiet, steady, free. And for the first time in her life, love didn't ask her to disappear. One Sunday evening, the two of them stood at the kitchen island. The room smelled like lemon and fresh bread. Nia wore an oversized shirt and no makeup. Cole had flour on his forearm and a tired smile. He looked at her, really looked. No heels, no designer labels, no press-worthy moment. And still, he was in awe. "I used to think I needed someone flawless," he said, voice low and sincere. "But I didn't need a perfect partner. I just needed someone real. Nia didn't speak right away. She just reached over, dusted the flour from his arm, and nodded. Love wasn't a performance anymore. It was sharing space, breathing through awkward silences, laughing at failed pancake flips, arguing respectfully about the right way to fold towels. It was admitting mistakes, apologizing without pride. It was showing up every day, not as an ideal, but as themselves. Nia didn't fix Cole. She didn't become his project or his redemption arc. She simply lived beside him in truth. And he stopped trying to impress the world and started honoring the world he shared with her. They didn't call what they had perfect. They called it theirs. And that was more than enough. The old Cole Sterling lived at the top of the skyline, in a world suspended above the rest of humanity. The new Cole lived in a modest modern home tucked into the edges of a Styrian city's hillside. District, still secure, still private, but it no longer needed to scream wealth. The days were quieter now. The mornings started with birdsong instead of alerts. No live feeds. No sync-ups with a board. No Veronica pacing in high heels over marble floors. Just the creak of real wood, the scent of fresh coffee, and Nia, humming softly as she moved about their shared space. He didn't need 5 assistants anymore. He had rhythm. He had purpose. He had love. Cole had built a custom smart home once. Now, he spent weekends building a real vegetable garden with Nia. He actually learned what it meant to till soil. His hands were no longer just for swiping devices. They now knew the texture of earth, the clumsiness of cutting vegetables, the gentleness of stroking Nia's cheek before bed. There was no press release for this change. No headline read, "Tech billionaire chooses peace over power." But those close enough saw it. An older neighbor once said, "You've got the look of a man who finally came home." They'd left the penthouse for good 6 months earlier. He sold it quietly. No farewell tour, just keys left on the counter, and a soft thank you whispered to a space that had held too many cold nights. He didn't need glass walls anymore. His world was no longer about the view, but about the person across the table. There was no grand anniversary party, no diamond-studded vows, no dramatic fireworks display with drones spelling out forever. Instead, there was a picnic in the backyard. Nia laid out a blanket, placed grilled vegetables on ceramic plates, and Cole, in a worn navy t-shirt, sat beside her, barefoot in the grass. He brought no gifts. He didn't need to. He had shown up every single day for the past year, fully present. That was the new currency of love in their world. He remembered once watching Veronica perform her perfect wife routine. In public, kissing his cheek just hard enough to make it click on camera. He remembered smiling then, but feeling absolutely empty inside. With Nia, there were no cameras, and still, he'd never smiled more. One evening, when a thunderstorm rolled over the house, the power flickered. For a moment, panic gripped Cole. But Nia lit a candle and handed him a cup of tea, just like she had that first night back in the penthouse. He realized then that real love doesn't need a script. It needs presence. Sometimes they danced in the kitchen to songs neither of them remembered the lyrics to. Sometimes they argued, softly, honestly, and then hugged in the middle of folding laundry. Sometimes Nia cried, not because of sadness, but because she still couldn't believe love could be this gentle. And Cole, he no longer asked himself if he was enough without his empire. He knew he was. Because when Nia looked at him, she didn't see a brand, she saw a man. And he loved her in return, not for her silence or service, but for her soul. The old Cole would have written it as a tech blog post, or maybe pitched it as a TED talk. Now, he just sat quietly on the porch with a worn notebook and a pen, staring out at the early morning mist as it danced through the garden they built together. He was writing a letter, one he would never publish. "Dear me," it began. "I thought success was about being untouchable, unstoppable. I thought love was something you acquired after you'd proven you were powerful enough to demand it. But the greatest love of my life didn't wait for me to be impressive. She waited for me to be honest. The empire I built nearly cost me everything. Not because ambition is evil, but because I made it a substitute for connection. I traded moments for milestones. intimacy for image. And yet, when I was finally still, broken, and quiet enough, I saw her. She was there the whole time, sweeping the floors beneath my arrogance, listening when I was too busy performing. Nia didn't try to fix me. She just saw me, and, in that presence, I healed. My greatest success isn't what I built. It's what I now protect. Love. He signed it, folded it, and placed it inside a book on the shelf. A simple memoir, not for sale. Just for their children someday, should they want to know who their father was before love saved him. Nia stood beside him, her head leaning against his shoulder as the sun dipped beneath the hills. They weren't rich in the way tabloids would describe, but they had wealth that could not be priced. She looked up at him and said, "Do you ever miss it?" "The noise?" he asked. She nodded. He chuckled softly, not even a little. There was no applause, no audience, no standing ovation, just the chirping of crickets, the soft wind through the trees, and the quiet thump of her heartbeat against his chest. And yet, it felt like the grandest love story ever lived. Because this one didn't need to be seen. It just needed to be lived. Cole leaned closer, kissed her forehead and whispered, "Thank you for showing me how to stay." Because that's what Nia had done. She hadn't just loved him when things looked beautiful. She loved him in the silence, in the dark, in the mess. She didn't need perfection. She needed presence. And so did he. Real love doesn't announce itself. It shows up when no one is watching. Dear viewers, have you ever experienced a love that didn't come with fireworks, but stayed when life went quiet? Drop a comment below. What does real love mean to you? Did this story touch you? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more soul-stirring stories like this. Let's remind the world, real love isn't loud, it's loyal.